Good afternoon. Welcome back to this session of having good meetings. I thought to start with I would kind of give you a kind of the context in where I come from when I talk about meetings. So your context may be a little bit different, which is okay. Just keep in mind as I share this topic, my background and context where I do meetings heavily influences what I'm going to talk about or what I'm going to say. So in some ways you have to apply it to your situation, but here's some things that I've kind of learned and am learning and try to practice. Now, likely that, let me say it this way, there are things that can be learned. For me, I can still learn. Sometimes I'm slow to catch on to some things, and so maybe through this I'll learn some more things, maybe some feedback about meetings that you've learned that I didn't include here. So just a little bit about meetings when I talk about meetings. So here's a little bit about Deeper Life's ministry, one aspect of the ministry. So DLM offers a short-term residential counseling primarily for married couples and single ladies. Okay. Couples usually stay at Deeper Life for 1 week, single ladies for 2 weeks. Formal counsel meetings, formal counseling, like times where we actually meet for sessions, they usually are in the morning and last for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So from about 9:45 to 12. Mine regularly, this is not the exception, regularly go past 12. So just if you do the math, that amounts to about 11 hours and 15 minutes per week. So 5 days a week. Monday through Friday. We also do walk-in or phone appointments. Walk-ins vary from 1 to 2 hours. Phone calls around an hour is what we try to limit it to. The marriage counseling schedule kind of operates on a 3-week schedule, 3-week cycle. So we have couples here week 1, week 2. The 3rd week, there's no couple here. So that's what we call an off week. And I think we kind of do that with single ladies too. Single ladies here for a couple weeks, and then no one, and then someone for 2 weeks, 3rd week, no one. So kind of like that. Okay, so that's a little bit of the context in which we minister here. So let's do a little bit of math. Thinking about meetings. So if there's 52 weeks in a year, divided by 3, okay, you got that number, times 2. So that's about 34 couples per year. Is that right? 52 divided by 3 is, I think, 14 or something. So times 2, so I would interact with that many couples in a year. Let's say to round it off, let's say 30 couples per year. 30 couples per year, 5 meetings per week equals 150 meetings per year. I've been here for at least 20 years. That's about 3,000 meetings. That's just in marriage counseling. Now, for some of you, okay, that says a little bit about my age too, but some of you that are in your early 50s, 60s, 70s, when you do the math of meetings that you've been in, not necessarily formal counseling, maybe it's informal, or maybe you're on a board or something. So you've had many meetings. it's actually good to sit down and think about how many meetings you've actually sat in or how many you've had to chair. There's a big difference in sitting in on a meeting and chairing a meeting, especially when it comes to counseling or mediation or things like that. So from all these meetings, I think I've seen some really good ones, and some like observing meetings. I've sat in on some very good ones. I've sat in on some meetings where people would doze off. They were tired or maybe didn't get enough sleep or something. I've sat in on some meetings that I was in charge of, and it didn't go well. I've had people like yell at each other, looking at each other, beside each other, and say just humiliating things. I've sat across the table from people that have talked to each other and said some very painful things. So meetings can be very good. Meetings can be very hard. And depending on where you are in the meeting, if the meeting is about you or if it's about somebody else and you're responsible for it. So where I'm coming from is more where you're kind of responsible for the meeting and where it goes, what you talk about, and all of those things. So one of the things I want to say in thinking about good meetings, think of it as a process as well. Don't think of it as, okay, I'm going to sight in my gun or my bow and we're going to hit it. Someone during the break told me just an illustration. He gave an illustration. He said this friend had problems with groundhogs. And so to take care of him, he would get a shotgun out and he would shoot him, try to shoot him. He said he didn't always hit him, like he missed sometimes, but he never planned to miss. Okay, now that's a good way to think about it. Like aim as if you're going to hit it. But be okay when it doesn't go exactly how you thought it was going to go. So some general principles first in thinking about meetings. Especially when you think about meetings with other people that you're trying to help. So, general principles about meetings. 1, meetings should be voluntary. That is, people are voluntarily coming to the meeting. Pressure, threat, manipulation, somehow being forced to come to a meeting is counterproductive to a good meeting. Now, I realize sometimes people need encouragement or convincing or see the value of going to a meeting, going for counseling. Sometimes people don't see that. Okay? So someone sees a need, wants to encourage them. I think there's a place for that. But there's a difference between encouraging and threatening. Sometimes, often, in the situations that I am familiar with, a wife usually sees a need for a meeting, like going to talk to someone, sooner than a man will. Or at least, maybe doesn't see it always the first, sees it first, but at least has enough gumption to say, we should do something about this. Could we talk to someone? That's usual. Okay, so in that case, a husband would need maybe encouragement to let's do this. So that'd be one scenario. Sometimes a minister or a church leader will see, hey, what do you think about going for help? Maybe they've worked with a couple they've worked with an individual, and they've kind of come to the end of what their resources are, or they don't have the time, they don't have the wherewithal to really help, because it takes much more than what they have. And so they suggest, how about you go to Fresh Start? But the person is, Fresh Start? I mean, think about it. That's, how long is it? 8 months? I have a job. I have mortgage. I have a family. I just can't go. Well, if you don't go, your church membership is on the line. Okay, sometimes in those cases, a brother, sister, maybe needs encouragement to get help. But there's a fine line between encouraging and threatening. So when people come, and it's I wouldn't say it's real common. There's times where people come and they don't want to be there. Now, I see it as my responsibility to actually climb over those barriers, like to actually interact with them, to try to understand why they're there, what they're up against in coming, what can I do, what can you do to kind of make the best of this time. And it's surprising. Well, in some ways it's surprising when you actually take that approach, trying to understand where people are coming from, and actually hear them out that they don't want to be there. And it's not necessarily because of me, but to understand them and to try to make the best of it. Could we try to make the best of it? Hey, we have 5 meetings. You can do 5 meetings. I mean, I'll try to understand. I'll try to walk with you. I would say more often than not, after the week, the person will have a comment about, this was hard, but I'm glad I came. It was hard to do. Thank you for being patient with me. So you may run into that where you want it to be voluntary. I think it should be voluntary, but there's times where it isn't. So when it isn't, you have extra work cut out for you. And not hammering harder, being more gentle and more patient. Now, just because you're gentle and patient does not necessarily mean that they will yield. They may still not want to be there. But I'm saying, make the best of it when it's not voluntary. General principles. It's good to talk about goals. When people request or schedule a meeting with you, they usually have an objective or objectives. They may have questions, need direction, sort out something that's complex to them. They might want your opinion, or they might want a second opinion. There's many different occasions. Understanding a person's goal is necessary for at least a couple reasons. One is to evaluate if you can help. I thought about the comment that Tom made about in the chiropractor's office about when you go to a chiropractor, you assume the chiropractor will adjust your structure and you're not going to adjust his. So the point is that when people come to you, they might have goals that you are not equipped to help them with. One of those could be, and this is somewhat common, is when I interact with a couple, okay, that they might not realize it, they might realize it, often they don't, is they're there for their spouses, to help their spouse. They want their spouse to change. And often the other spouse is there to help their spouse change. So the point is that's a goal that they have. Now, they don't necessarily say that, but it's good to get the goals on the table. Like, what are you here for? So that is to evaluate if I can actually help them. The second one is to see, like to actually measure whether or not you're getting anywhere. So if you don't have any goals, you don't know how far off you are or how close you are. So it's good to establish goals and to be on the same page with the people that you interact with. So some important things, I think, that are good goals to aim for is, especially when you think about ministry, is to address and resolve issues in a biblical manner. Like we consider ourselves a biblical counseling ministry. That is, we base our counsel on what the scriptures teach. Now, that might not be a verse or a chapter and verse for all the things that we talk about. Some things are just general principles that we've gleaned from the scriptures. Or the scripture actually gives direction to some of those things. The scripture doesn't talk about everything that we talk about, but we glean principles from scripture that we use in how we live and how we talk. So we do it in a biblical manner. Addressing an issue means being open and honest about what someone is facing, how it's affecting them, and what they are doing about it. So there's kind of three pieces to that. That is, what is happening outside of them, how is it affecting them inside, and what are they doing about it? So an important first step in addressing an issue is being able to talk about it, to put words to an experience. Now that can be done verbally, it can be done in writing about it. There's just a couple ways. Another step in the process is to honestly evaluate the effect of a particular experience. Taking the time to understand the emotional effects of a particular experience on a person communicates that you care about them as an individual. And it shows to them, too, that you care about more than what is happening to them. Like you are not counseling a situation. You're actually interacting with a person. You're counseling a person. So don't think of the person as, like Tom said, not a project, but you're not counseling a situation either. The situation is the context in which you're counseling, in which you're ministering, but you're actually ministering to a person. It also communicates that you're concerned about them as a whole person, like both what they're experiencing, how it's affecting them, what they're doing. That encompasses a whole person. You interact with them as individuals, and you interact with them not like a robot. They're not a robot. If you just push the right buttons, you'll get the right. Give the right input, you'll have the right output. That is not how people work. That's not how I work, and that's not how you work. People make choices. They're not fed information and then they do it. No. Information comes in, but there's a lot of processing going on, and then a lot of evaluating and choices and whether I want to or not going on before we actually act. So the final step is to look at your responses to your experience. Resolving issues in a biblical manner means looking at each of these steps, evaluate oneself by principles from God's Word, and putting to practice what God says. It's not enough to only talk about what is happening or only discuss how it affected me and only reveal how I respond to it. Okay? It's saying all three of those are important in addressing and resolving issues in a biblical manner. A second goal, beyond addressing that, is to think about things like spiritual growth, maturity, or godliness. Spiritual growth refers to an individual's personal relationship with God. Establishing where a person is in relationship with God is an important starting point. That does not mean that's the first question you ask. I'm just saying that's one of the things you have to consider in your meetings. That's not always easy, but there's basically two options. A person is either a believer or a person is an unbeliever. An unbeliever you want to guide to the Lord. Okay? A believer, you want to help them grow up in their faith. Grow up in the Lord. The person that professes faith in Christ and understands some of the basic teachings about Christianity, sin, God's love, salvation through Christ's death on the cross, etc. Regardless where the believer is in his relationship with God, he can grow and mature. Some of these things I touched on earlier. Loving God and loving one's neighbor is another goal. That is actually the outworking of a relationship with God. Being loving toward God and neighbor is the all-compassing responsibility of the believer. It captures both a vertical and horizontal relationship. It begins with loving God because of who He is and what He's done for us. It follows with loving my neighbor, which can be expressed in many different ways. And the ultimate goal is to glorify God. Believers glorify God by putting their faith in Him for salvation and by continuing in their salvation, turning to Him when they fall, repenting of their sin. He is also glorified when we turn to Him in our trouble, sorrow, confusion, disappointment. God is also glorified when we trust and obey Him in spite of doubts that assail us. And they will. They will you and they will other people. We are people that are in the process of being conformed to the image of Christ. Another general principle about meetings is a schedule. A schedule. A schedule helps with short and long-term planning and reminds you of upcoming appointments. I've had experiences where someone didn't look at the schedule and two couples showed up at the same place with the same counselor for the same week. Now, it's pretty hard to do two couples counseling at the same time. I've never tried it. So it's just, if you have a schedule, okay, it's good to have a schedule. That's one of the things that it can help. It can help prevent double scheduling. But it also communicates something to the people that you're interacting with. So it's helpful to have a schedule. Part of a schedule includes things like a date. That's pretty simple. But sometimes people don't write the date down. So people that you interact with, make sure you have the same date, the same month. Things like a start time. These things may seem simple, but if you don't have a start time, it likely won't start. Or it won't start on time, and a lot of time is wasted. So a start time. Establish a start time and communicate it to the people. Don't assume that people know what your schedule is. Okay? Communicate it. There are exceptions to the rule, but it's an exception, not a rule, to have a start time. Establishing a start time sets expectations and establishes goals. If you or your client are regularly late, you have something to work on. Okay, so if you have a start time and you're off, either you or them, that means the question is, why are you late? Or why do you even have a start time? If you're not going to make it, what's the point? Well, that means you have something to work on. And if they are regularly late, you should note that. That's important. Because people that are regularly late, it affects the schedule of other people in their lives, and it may give you a bigger picture about why they came to see you. It's not just important to have a start time, it's important to have a stop time. For your and your client's sanity, establish when you bring your session to a close. This does not mean you cannot extend your meeting time. My wife knows that she shouldn't plan hard and fast on me being there at 12 o'clock. She's fairly flexible. But there's also a thing of me realizing, hey, if I regularly go over, something is off. Okay, so if it's, let's say, the first morning or second morning, there's a little bit of give and take because I'm not sure what I'm going to get into. And I want to be careful not to, in the middle of something, just say, hey, let's bring this airplane down now. I got to go home for lunch. No, I want to be considerate and sensitive to where people are, and when they're talking about something, I don't want to just say, hey, I have a schedule and I'm going to keep it. Okay? So, like I said, there's exceptions to the rule, but try to have a time where you bring your session to an end. Establishing an end time can help in focusing your energies. Human beings can only handle so much, and establishing and bringing a meeting to an end is a recognition of that. You are not omniscient. You don't have all the time and energy in the world, and neither does your client. And even if you think you do, they don't. They can only handle so much, and the same is true for you. You kind of run out of good things after so long. Another general principle about good meetings is have an agenda or a plan. Now understand when I say agenda can have a negative connotation. Like, I've got this thing figured out, and I'm going to bring the ammunition and the weapon that I'm going to use this morning, and I know exactly where it's going. Okay, that's not what I mean by an agenda. What I mean by an agenda is you kind of have a plan for that session. Okay, you have something in mind where you're going. Even if it's your first session, you have something in mind. You're not just, I have no clue what I'm doing. Now, I'll be honest with you. There are meetings that I go to where I'm not quite sure where to start. Okay? But it's not like it's just a blank sheet. It's just there's a number of things floating around, and I realize by the time I get to the meeting, I've got to start somewhere. I've got to take one of those things that are floating around like a butterfly and say, you are the most important one, at least right now. We're going to start here. So don't come with, I have an agenda, here it is, I know what it is, and I'm going to drive the point home. Okay, no, that's not what I mean. But neither should you come with, I have no clue, I have nothing in my mind. No, you should have an agenda. Having an agenda or plan is a helpful tool in utilizing the time and gathering the information that you need to understand and help this person. Having an agenda does not mean being inflexible. My initial meetings with people, I usually have, and I tell them, okay, I have a series of questions that I have to get to know you, okay? And for their sake, I have that to just get to know them, to talk about just common knowledge information. It's nothing very personal. Everyone has that information. It's basic things like, what is your address? What is your phone number? What is your age? How long have you been married? How many children do you have? What are the names of your children? Each of you could name those. Now, if it gets a little more technical, like the age of your children or what are their birthdays, that's a little bit, that's not necessarily important to me. Just the names of your children. Are they married? Things like that. Okay, that does a couple things. It gives me a lot of information, but it also gets people comfortable just talking with me about common everyday things. So if they're uptight, stressed about a meeting, a counseling session, kind of take some of that away by just talking about common everyday things that they would talk to anyone. Sometimes in that initial meeting, okay, remember I have an agenda, I have a plan, but often, somewhere along the way, that discussion goes off of what is part of my agenda. Well, to be flexible is to say, allow them to talk about that. And even, depending on what it is, I may actually ask additional questions to help me understand, but eventually I'll bring it back to the agenda to say, we'd like to talk about this, maybe we can talk about this later, but here's some things that are important for me to know at this point. Especially, I do that especially if it goes off a lot, where we go on to subjects where, hey, I need some background before I can actually give input on what you're talking about. I have to know this. If I don't know this, my counsel will be off. So it's good to have an agenda and a plan, but be flexible. Be flexible with your plan. It's the general principle about good meetings. Open and honest communication. That is, I assume when people come and talk to me, they will be honest with me, that they will be, to a degree that they'll be open. The part about honesty is being truthful to the best of their ability. Now, I realize that people don't see themselves. I don't see myself clearly all the time. So I realize and am flexible with that too, just to realize questions that are asked of people. Sometimes they give their perspective about something, and they're not necessarily being dishonest. They're just being how they see it. The quality of openness means expressing yourself to the best of your ability. And this may include verbal or written forms. The quality of honesty or truthfulness is crucial for accurately knowing an individual and his situation. If a person is not truthful, it will shape your counsel. So here's an example. This is a little bit, it's in the realm of morals. When it comes to the realm of morals, especially sexual, especially a man that's involved in immorality, more often than not, that person does not see himself accurately. And so I can ask questions about, for example, the area of pornography. Involved in pornography? No. Other forms of the same kinds of sins? No, no, no. Over here, ask the question from a different angle, and it's like, yes, yes, yes. And in my mind, it's like, okay, you said no here, but you say yes here. How does that compute? Okay, well, the truth is, sometimes a person doesn't see himself. Just, he can say no here, but yes here, when you actually get down to the details. So keep that in mind. Open and honest. Sometimes people don't see themselves. They say it. Maybe they get to know you better. Here it's no. Here it's yes. So be sensitive to that. Not all people are ready to openly talk. Be patient with that as well. People have been burned. People have been slapped around when they've expressed how they actually feel or how they think. It's like they were asked to be open, they were asked to be honest, but then when they did, they got their hand slapped or their mouth slapped. And so they're what is called gun shy. Like they don't want to have their hand or mouth slapped again. And so when you invite people to be open and honest, then be respectful of that, of them being open and honest. Handle what they say carefully. I see this in counseling couples. When counseling, interacting with them, open and honest communication means that there can be different perspectives about the same situation. Like we don't all experience a situation the same way. You put two people in the same situation, and they'll experience it. They can experience it very differently. They'll remember different things that happened from that meeting or that interaction. And I'm saying in counseling couples, I've observed that does not necessarily mean that they're being dishonest. They're just remembering or viewing it very differently. Open and honest communication means, too, speaking and listening. Good communication includes both speaking and listening. Speaking is an important avenue by which a person expresses himself. Listening, on the other side, is an important avenue by which we understand someone else. Both qualities are important for effective communication. Taking notes. Tom talked about that a little bit. I'll just mention a little bit. Note-taking is a method of keeping records. I've done it with pen and paper, pencil and paper. I've done it with an iPad. I've tried it with computer. Computer, I don't have the brain capacity to be able to listen and type at the same time. It just takes too much concentration to type. But I can listen and write at the same time. And even for a short time, write and look at someone. Now, again, this is not a hard, fast rule. You can take notes. You don't have to take notes. If you have a good memory, after you have a session, get the main idea. I tend to be short on memory, and so I try to take notes as I go. I do communicate to the couple that I interact with, or other people too. I try to remember to say, is it okay if I take notes, or just communicate, hey, I do take notes. If they're not comfortable with me taking notes, I try to respect that. But that means I need to take time afterward to actually summarize, shorthand, something for me to remember. Taking notes is helpful if you have a long-term relationship with someone. So for me, if I interact with, let's say, one couple one week, couple the next week, nobody the third week, so on and so forth. Do you know what happens 2 months down the road? Somebody calls and wants a phone appointment, and I want to know, maybe I see it on the schedule, and I'm like, Joe and Susie. Joe and Susie. Joe and Susie. Joe and Susie. I don't know Joe and Susie. I'll go ask maybe Tom, he schedules it, or Lori, and say, hey, did you schedule that? Yeah. One of them did. And who is this? Oh, they were here 3 weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. Oh, man. Do you know how notes help? For me, I can go to my iPad or my files and Joe and Susie. Pull it out and it's like, I remember. I can picture them. Even if I can't picture them, just from the notes that I have, it comes back. And it is very helpful. In fact, it's humiliating, humbling, humiliating, some ways humiliating, when you talk to someone and they say, I talked with you like 2 months ago, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't remember you. Now, it could be I'm getting old, but it's helpful to take notes. For that reason, I take notes, but I try to be sensitive to other people as well. So note-taking can be helpful in keeping track of what you talked about, for records, for if you have a long-term relationship with someone, to know what you worked on, what advice you gave, what counsel you gave. Because sometimes they can come back and say, hey, they instructed me to do thus and thus. Another thing that's helpful for me in interacting with people, this thing of confidentiality, is I try to note whether or not I ask them if it is okay if I communicate with their leaders. And if they say, we'd rather you not, I try to make a note of that, and I try to respect that. So note-taking can help with things like that. Confidentiality or being trustworthy. Confidentiality means protecting or preventing disclosure of personal or private information from unauthorized individuals. So sometimes people that care want to know about people that have been to deeper life. Well, we have a policy that we try not to disclose who's here, who was either here, how long they were here, or anything like that. Now, there's exceptions. If it's a minister that sent them or encouraged them to come, we may say things like, yes, they were here. But we try to be careful how much personal information we actually give about the person. Now, some of those things have limits, depending what those things are. If it's criminal, no, we will not cover for you if you've done criminal acts. Now, we try to communicate to them that reality of being confidential, but there's some things that's not, we will not hide. We will not have you hide or you cannot use us to hide what you've done if it's criminal. Sometimes also it's wisdom things. Sometimes it's safety things. Like some people are a danger to others or a danger to themselves. And so confidentiality is not, we will not keep that to ourselves. We will, if it's appropriate, we will share that with others. So criminal acts, extreme neglect, or when a person is in danger to himself or others, it's important to inform the appropriate people. And the last one I have of general principles is serve. Serve. This is an opportunity to actually serve another person. I think Brian kind of started that. Like, it is a privilege to actually have the opportunity to interact with someone on that level, where they, in my case, often it is where I get the privilege to actually meet with someone. I don't have to go to them. They actually come to me. Like, think about that. Now, that's both humbling and a great responsibility, because when somebody entrusts in a sense what's going on inside them to me, I hold something of them that's very precious, and I could do a lot of damage with that. So it's an opportunity to actually be faithful with information, but also an opportunity to actually serve them. The opportunity to meet with someone is a privilege and a responsibility. Serving the person by being compassionate, listening to their story, questions, or turmoil is a blessing. It may include weeping with them. Now, there's times where people tell stories where I can't help but cry. And at first I kind of felt uncomfortable with it, but maybe it's the older I get, the more comfortable I get with when someone has gone through something that's very difficult. It's good to feel sorrow for people's trouble. That's a blessing. It's also a blessing to be able to, when people share joys that they've experienced, to be able to rejoice with them. We can serve in different ways. We can serve by answering logistical questions or pointing to someone who can help them. There are times where people ask me questions that I don't really know, but it's a blessing to be able to serve and say, hey, here's an organization that actually does this. So if you have financial questions or financial trouble, here's a resource. Here's some people that you can actually contact, and they will help you with that. That's an opportunity to serve. Shifting gears. Ingredients or elements to good meetings. So I kind of break it down into two big sections: initial meetings and subsequent meetings. So in an initial meeting, what should be included in the first session? This is what you should include. I'm saying this is some of the things that have been helpful for me in ministry. So in the initial meeting, what I like to do is, with pretty much every session that I start and end, I like to begin with prayer. I like to begin with prayer for my sake and for their sake. Just recognizing I am the Lord's servant, and I want to say the things that the Lord wants me to say. These things should not come out of my own head. They should not come out of my own mind. They should come out of, this is what God says. I am God's servant, and I want to be faithful to Him. I want to recognize Him at the beginning of our interaction. Second thing you want to look for is, what I think about is a bird's eye view. So a bird's eye view is kind of like getting into an airplane and getting a flyover. That is a big picture view of the person's life. So with things like that, here's some things like, usually that includes a timeline. A timeline is maybe when a person was born, maybe like highlights of a person's life. And you might not do that in the session, but I'm saying at some point it can be helpful to actually put a lot of information. It's helpful to put on a timeline, especially when it involves many years. It can kind of make it kind of sort it out in your own mind. That can be helpful. So a timeline is a handy tool to organize chronological information. So that's a bird's eye view. A feet on the ground view is a micro view. It talks, you get the details of a person's life. So think about a wheel with spokes. So in the center is the big question, is the smaller question about different areas of their life. So so a wheel with spokes is kind of a helpful tool. It gives you a lot of information just at a glance. So in this, with a wheel and spokes, is in the center is the hub, then you have your spokes, and outside is the wheel. So in each of those sections, you would have a little bit of information about the individual. So things like their history, like their family or their parents, their siblings in one category, places that they've lived, significant relationships that they've had, their education, their occupation. So those are just some of the areas you can fill in there. Another thing I like to do in an initial meeting is what I call a heart model. Okay, this is not the first thing that I do, but usually the first thing that I do is try to go through the questions that I have, and then I give them opportunity to talk about why they're there, what their presenting problem is, or what they would like from me. So after I've done that sometimes is in the first session, sometimes it's in the second, sometimes it's in the third. But I like to do this at some point, is come down to what I call a heart model. So here's a picture of the heart model. So this is just the gray area that you see. Well, let me just say what it is. So the gray area is kind of thinking about the sovereignty of God. The little blue one is thinking about the world in which they live. That kind of describes their situation. Okay. Part of that includes their history, their family, crisis events in their life, significant relationships, experiences that they've had. That's just some of the information. Talking about the present situation that they're in, their life context, significant relationships that they're in, present family, present problems, and then this heart, and talk about what's going on inside of them. So different categories: thoughts, feelings, desires, plans, purposes, motives. Some of this is a separate session or even a separate seminar, but this kind of gives you an idea. This arrow describes things that are coming out of them. What are they doing? How are they talking? And then I basically go through it and say, here's a big view of how Scripture talks about life. Life is not, the situations in life do not make you do things. Scripture talks about it very differently. Scripture talks about, yes, the things of life do affect you, but what's coming out of you is actually what is the real you. So it's just saying that God is over the situations in your life. Those things that are coming into your life, they affect you. They put pressure and bring out of you what's in you. And it's reflected in what you say and do. And this green arrow between the heart and God is, this connects you to God. Now, where are you in that relationship with God? If you are disconnected from God, you will not be able to make sense of the hard realities of life, or even the good realities of life. So, this is what I mean by kind of a heart model. So that's what I like to do in an initial meeting. And last and not least in this initial meeting, I think Tom mentioned it, hope and encouragement. Usually people that come for counseling are troubled. They're often in despair, or their hope is seriously lacking. They have lost courage. And so in many cases, they look to you. They look to me for encouragement, for hope. Point them to one who is able to give them hope and who is lasting hope. People that have struggled long and hard are often discouraged. They've repeatedly tried and expectations have been unfulfilled. Encouraging people that come for help is an important ingredient to a good meeting. In subsequent meetings, like I mentioned, I like to pray, even with subsequent meetings. Any subsequent meeting I have, prayer. Just remind them that I am dependent on God. This is not me, some professional, I get it from somewhere. I went to school and I got it and now I'm giving it to you. That is not how it is. Unless I haven't experienced it. It's just that's not how I operate. It's like, Lord, I need you. And I try to instill in the people, same principle. You need God, I need God, we're in the same position. I follow up with an update. So if I've given assignment, if I've given homework, if I've asked them to do something, I want to have some feedback. Another thing that's included in an update is, has anything, since our last meeting, has anything significant happened that I should know? There are times where something significant happens for people that is important for me to know. Sometimes it's a hospitalization, sometimes it's a medical condition, sometimes it's an accident, sometimes it's a loved one, like someone very close to them has died, or has had serious accident, or they've been separated. If you don't have that information, you're missing out on something that's crucial. So it's important to get an update. So it'd be things like follow up on homework. Think about this homework, okay, to follow up on it. 2 areas I like to ask about is what went well? Like, what did you do well in that homework? Often homework doesn't go real well. And it's important to actually talk about what didn't go well, because then you actually have something to work on. So if you give homework, follow up on it, find out what went well, find out where they need additional help. C. Observe and address themes and patterns in a constructive manner. And when I say themes and patterns, I mean destructive ones. Look for themes or patterns in behavior that are healthy and productive and commend them. So when I interact with a couple that has communication troubles and they actually work on it and they make progress, I try to note that and commend them. You listened well to your wife. You heard her out. You may not agree with what she says, but you did well in hearing her out. Now, we need to work on after the fact. Like you listened for 10 minutes, but the last 5 you didn't do so well. We need to work on that. Patterns and themes that are of a destructive nature should be corrected. Interruptions, arguing, talking over each other, yelling, cursing, name-calling are destructive in interpersonal relationships. It's important to explore and confirm these negative patterns and not just shoot from the hip. Just because one spouse says, he said, she says, it's important to confirm that and even what that means before you actually give counsel. It's important to not just address what was said and done. It's important to get to the heart of where those things come from. It's important to address them, okay, the things that came out, but don't lose sight of the heart behind it needs to be addressed. So, in that, address the heart from where these issues stem from, providing instruction, hope, and encouragement for change. People need encouragement that they can change. By the grace of God, everyone can grow and change. Or D, give clear directives in writing. It doesn't cease to amaze me how I can tell people what I want them to do, and you ask me 20 minutes later, or I want to write down what did I instruct them to do, and I don't remember. I did not remember. I remember one, but not two, three, or four. So it's important for me, when I give instruction, write it down. A copy for them, a copy for me. Or sometimes they'll write it down, I'll write it down for myself. Like they write it for themselves, I write it for myself. I just had a couple here recently that they actually wrote it down. They went to their residence where they stayed, and then they left for the afternoon, and they forgot the book in which it was written. So when I asked them the next morning, so how about the assignment? Did you do it? Not how did it go, did you do it? I didn't have to ask how did it go. They said we didn't do it. We wrote it down, put it in the book, we forgot to take it along. And so we didn't do it. So be clear, put it in writing. It doesn't solve everything, but it can solve a lot of forgetfulness. So be clear, concise, if possible, write it down. For example, when giving a reading assignment for a particular resource, write down the title of the resource, the pages you want them to read, and whatever else you want them to do. If you have a main point from a recording, if you want them to record a main point, communicate it. I recently asked a man that was experiencing financial troubles to write out his creditors and how much he owed them. Came back the next day and he had it. Creditors, how much he owed. But he didn't tally it. Well, the thing is, I didn't ask him to tally it. And the third thing I asked him to do is write out a plan, write out a repayment plan, like what is your repayment plan? And so he came back and he did it. He had the creditors, he had the amount, and he had the plan written out. So when he was done, I asked him, did you communicate or ask your wife for input about your plan? He said, no. Was I supposed to? Now, that's up to him. I think it's a good idea, but if I expect him to do that, then I should communicate that to him. So just be concise, clear. Don't expect people, if you expect things from people, communicate it to them. It can solve a lot of misunderstanding. So don't assume people know what you're thinking. Communicate it. In subsequent meeting, I mentioned this. Behind things that people say or do is a heart. And you want to try to understand that heart. What we're driving at is not behavior modification. We're looking for heart change. Heart change. It's quite easy to get into the details of an interpersonal conflict, the what, the when, the where, how often something happened. And those pieces are important. However, it is crucial that we come back to evaluating where the heart is. We are not simply looking to change outward things. We're looking for a heart change. Evaluations. So we have evaluations. Some of Deeper Life's feedback includes some evaluations about the counselor. So some of the questions on that evaluation are, we have the clients rate the counselor 1 to 5 in the following areas. Was it a comfortable atmosphere? Did you feel cared for? Did you feel understood? Was the counselor's assessment of your problem correct? And were the homework assignments relevant to your situation? Okay, that's kind of an evaluation to see how is the counselor doing. So I have some things that I personally think about. So a personal evaluation, I try to, on occasion, to do this. What was the balance of the conversation? Was it primarily me talking or them talking? There should be a balance, okay? Initial sessions, they likely do a lot of the talking and I do a lot of the listening. But somewhere along the way, I should be doing something with instruction. Not that I do a whole session of talking. I don't think I could do that. Like, I don't have the ability to talk and talk and talk for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I'm saying that's a problem if that is the case. That's more a lecture than a counseling session. So is there balance in the conversation? Second, how am I coming across to the counselee in things like tone, manner, or attitude? Those are good things to evaluate for me. The other question that I can ask is, what progress has been made? And what needs ongoing work? So that's for a personal evaluation for interacting with them. For the client evaluation, it's similar things like their character, their performance, their goals. So is my client engaged in the counseling process? Is my client completing assignments? How thoroughly? Like how engaged are they? Are we getting to the heart of the issue? And what is my relationship with the counselee? Is it free and open or is it strained? Are there things that I sense between them or that I sense they're kind of not being transparent? Sometimes you pick up some of those things. When I sense some of those things, I try to actually lay it on the table and have an open discussion about it. Between meetings, that is, what do you do between meetings? Well, it doesn't mean it's just time goes by, water goes under the bridge, you don't think about them. No, I try to remember the clients that I interact with. So if I know I have a session coming up, I try to do several things. One, I try to pray for the people that I'm interacting with. Secondly, I try to prepare for the next session. That is where my notes come in handy to look over what did we talk about, what are the summary issues that I noted that we need to come back to. Sometimes I follow up with an email, a text, but I try to be careful with that. And is it necessary or wise? And then the last one, in concluding meetings. Summarize what we worked on, the progress that was made, and work that needs to continue. I try to ask if there's any closing questions that they have, or something that needs clarification. I like to go over the assignment. You have the assignment. Do you understand it? Do you have any questions about it? Schedule or confirm the next meeting, if there is one. Close with a prayer, thanking God for His help, request His ongoing grace to live godly, and any particular things that I know that we're working on with them. I try to include that in the prayer. So, in conclusion, having good meetings don't just happen. Having good meetings has a lot to do with planning, has to do with character, and it has to do with having a goal, setting goals, having an agenda, and when you do that, you can have good meetings. Thank you for your time.